Hi, everybody. Welcome again to Music is Medicine Monday. My name is Amy Thiessen, and I'm here every week talking about voice, communication, expression, and of course, sharing some music with you. Today, I want to talk about how sensitivity can be cultivated and become one of the greatest strengths and assets that we have in order to connect and communicate with integrity and clarity and impact. You know, I think of sensitivity, and for the longest time, I thought it was my weakness. I was too sensitive, too emotional. I took things too personally, and I felt responsible for everything. And now I'm not going to act like that all just went away, but what has happened over time is I've learned that perceptiveness, those feelings that kind of come from being hyper-aware, that those can be honed and they can become a real asset so that when we talk to people, we can do so from a steady anchor of awareness and of empathy. And now I'm going to dive into all of that and talk about the blog that I wrote this week. But before I do, I want to start with a mantra that I love, and it is a mantra to Shiva. Now, in the Vedic tradition, which is where yoga and Hinduism come from, in that tradition, Shiva is like the personification of consciousness. You know, that which is always present, that which is always full of peace. And so when we sing to Shiva, we are asking to see things in clarity with a willingness, you know, to get past blind spots, our own insecurity, our self-doubt, our blame, our narrative, and find resolution in that which is really here. And it's that awareness that so beautifully allows us to connect, whether we are aware of our insecurity or sensitivity without drowning in it, or whether we become more attuned to what's happening for the person in front of us beyond just their words or actions. So I hope you guys like this mantra. It is one of my favorites. And it's called Jai Shiva, Shankara, Boom Boom, Hara Hara. It's not really called that. That is the mantra. Here we go. Years ago, I think I'd been teaching yoga for about 10 years, and my boss at the time was coming to evaluate one of my classes. And I knew from other teachers that their feedback had been really difficult to process. It was emotional, and there were some challenges in it. And I also knew that my boss at the time was struggling a little bit with, giving this feedback. It felt that it was important, but also, it was a bit tenuous. And so they came to my class, and they were sitting in the front row, and I remember feeling all the nerves, the insecurity, the nervousness, that okay, how do I impress? Fortunately, by this point, I had become more and more attuned to noticing sensations and to speaking to that. And so as I felt the uneasiness and the insecurity, I actually taught to it. And instead of thinking about what to say, I allowed my voice and my words to hit what I was feeling and observed what was going on in my body and what was going on in the breath and the presence of the people there. Now, I knew intuitively when I was teaching to my manager. I could tell that's kind of the energy I was speaking to. That was my sense anyway. But it wasn't my idea of them or my narrative of them or my idea of how they could or should be. It was really just speaking to this subtle feeling and allowing it to dissipate. And at the end of the class, my manager came up to me and they thanked me. And when they did, I could see that, they had been touched and they were a bit emotional, and that was it. I actually never got evaluated on my class because in that class we connected. And that really is what communication is. It's to connect. Now, I have definitely, and still at times do, struggle with taking things personally that aren't mine or feeling overly responsible. But what I've learned is that these things can, as I said, be honed into skill. And so if, you find that you're really kind of hyper aware of everything or hyper vigilant, being aware of that is amazing. Or if you find you get defensive or really reactive or really emotional, these are all reasons I have that clients come to me because they think that maybe they're doing something wrong. But what really is happening is that we just need to integrate this experience into the body. And so the very first thing I speak to in the blog, and I'll go through probably all of them, is to, and I've said this like a broken record, to attend to yourself. But I mean really to come into self. Most of the time when there's anxiety and spinning and over insecurity, it's because the focus is on someone else or some ideology of how it should be or how we might manipulate to get them to respond a certain way. And so when we bring it back in, what we're really doing is just getting clear with where we are outside of the situation. Now, in the blog, I'm going to give you a bunch of prompts that you can use, but it's really what emotions are happening. Not, I feel like they're doing this. I feel insecure. I feel nervous. I feel angry. I feel frustrated because. I feel sad because. And this is a time for complete permission. Every feeling is allowed here, as well as every thought. I'm thinking that they don't like me. I'm afraid of this. All of that. And as we start to kind of write it out, we take this giant kind of convoluted mess of overwhelm and we start to see the pieces. And in pieces, we can begin to approach ourselves and each other with more clarity. So one way we do this is attending to ourselves, taking space, reflecting, noticing our feelings, etc. We might also do this through creativity. If you've heard me sing, you see how much I get into it. This is a place where I can let just everything out. And particularly creativity that does not have a goal in mind. Yeah, just a space to dance, move, paint, draw, sing. Allow emotion to be in motion. Allow energy to move through the system. And when we do this, not only are we being creative, which is awesome, but creativity is like taking time with emotion or journaling, it is an excavation. So often it's through that channel of creativity that we begin to touch, those tender and sensitive and really sacred places in ourself. And in my opinion, creativity with devotion to something greater, like the mantra I just did, or your own prayers, your own tradition, to something greater than ourselves, is a really beautiful place to express the things we cannot seem to articulate. Because it doesn't matter what words we use, it is about expressing a feeling that may not actually articulate through language. Yeah. As we come to know ourselves, we also will start to understand what we need. And our responsibility is to address our needs. I'm not saying that other people shouldn't be involved, okay? Sometimes I address my needs for closeness and friendship by hanging out with friends. So every need we have is going to have kind of a human component that's universal, and there's probably going to be some specific desire or want. So for example, if maybe I'm feeling left out in my relationship or kind of neglected in some way, and what I really want is for my partner and I to spend some real quality time together, yeah? There's a very specific desire, and there's this general need of belonging and closeness. And the reason why that is important and why I separate that, when we have the kind of specific desire, we can ask for it. We can use it as a request to have that need met. The general desire, the universal human desire, can help us meet those needs on our own, to self-regulate, and to learn what works for us and what doesn't. Now, as we explore our needs, and it is an exploration. I mean, your 20s, I think, are basically just meant for this. We try things out. We learn how to take care of ourselves. We go for walks. We might journal. We might sing. We might play, right? That might be our taking care of our own needs. But it's also asking for help, learning how to delegate, and starting to see, what works and what doesn't. Ultimately, we're going to have some needs that don't really get met the way that we want them to. And this often, as a sensitive, can feel like a failure on our part. I should just be more understanding, or I should be okay with that, or I should just let it go. And yet somehow we can't seem to do any of those things. Usually, that's because there's a need that's not being met, and that's okay. So taking time to grieve those needs that can't be met. Maybe we had a parent that we wanted to treat us differently than they did, but they didn't have the capacity. And so we grieve that maybe they weren't as responsive as we wanted. Or we grieve that our partner is too busy with work and we're disappointed. And by taking the time to actually allow the sadness and allow the emotion through, it's no longer about making it go or letting it go or being more compassionate. It is just allowing our humanness to be. And as we come to know this, maybe we're, as I said, going to meet our needs in other ways. Maybe we're going to hang out with a friend. Maybe we're going to go for a walk in nature. The more we do these things, the more we cultivate and understand, what really is important to us. What are our real values? What do we really need to be content? And then we also start to change our choices. Yeah? So for example, maybe somebody really wants a partner, like a real partner, somebody who's devoted and committed and connected and engaged. You find yourself dating this guy who's sort of interested and the sex is great, and so you stay in it. And, I know this story from a lot of people I've talked to. And you stay in it even though they're never really giving you that thing that you want. And it feels like because they're not giving it that maybe you feel like you're failing or you're doing it wrong. But what's happening is just different needs. And so when you get that, when you start to see that and go, you know what, no, I actually just need and want somebody who is as engaged as I am and who is as devoted as I am and as caring as I am in a relationship because I'm looking for something bigger, then ending that part, that dating or whatever it is, ending that It's not one person not being good enough and the other person being, too good or whatever. It's two people with very different needs acknowledging the difference of where they are. And that isn't easy, but it is wildly empowering to begin to recognize what we need and what we value, and then move in the direction of that. Little by little, we cultivate communities and friendships and activities that bring us a sense of truth, a sense of alignment. And that's a really beautiful thing. Another way that our sensitivity becomes a gift, especially as we start to kind of come deeper into it and understand our needs and sense things, is we begin to speak to other people where they are, as opposed to where we imagine them to be or where our own insecurities are telling us that they are. I spoke about that in my example. Instead of trying to fix or make it work, to speak to what I was feeling was an uneasiness in that class, and to talk to it. And when we do this, we can do it in a variety of ways. We might ask questions, right? We might say, I'm noticing or I'm sensing like maybe some apprehension in my body. Is everything okay with you? Or, wow, when you said that, I feel really defensive right now, and I just need a second to ground. We might also connect in empathy even in our leadership, in our presentations. If I'm teaching a class or I'm working with a group, there are some groups I can come in and I can just be ridiculous off the bat. They know me, it's easy. But there's other groups where maybe I sense judgment or I sense apprehension, and by speaking to that right away, it actually helps dissolve that tension and opens us up to better and more effective communication. One of my goals personally is that, and I haven't totally hit this, sometimes I hit it, sometimes I don't, is that if somebody, maybe gets mad at me or belligerent or angry and they give me feedback in a way that seems really mean or rude or cruel, or they're saying something, instead of taking it personally, I actually want to try and hear what's underneath it. I remember years ago I was running a teacher training, and I totally pushed these students to the limit, and I realized that it was my first one. And I asked one of the people to come in, and I just asked for feedback, and when they spoke, there was a lot of blame and a lot of criticism and kind of a harshness. And I actually precursored everything with saying, I don't care if it's mean or if it's rude or if it's harsh. I want you to say exactly what you're feeling, how you're feeling, and go. And what I learned from that wasn't, the specifics. It was that they didn't feel supported. It wasn't so much the words they were saying. I could hear that they didn't feel supported. And then when I could speak to that and say, it sounds like maybe you don't feel supported as you need. And I get that. How can I help, or how can we work this out? That whole situation transformed. And it became one of depth and intimacy and learning. And I, to this day, have crazy respect for that person because they were willing to just let it out. Yeah. The last thing I want to mention is that it's baby steps. If you are sensitive, if you tend to be really empathic, and empathetic, my guess is already that you make people feel at ease or people feel safe to you. Maybe they open up to you. These are all beautiful things to acknowledge. It's easy when we feel insecure or nervous to focus on the negative. I do it too. But to acknowledge the little steps, the small steps, the moments in the day where that sensitivity was a gift, because that allows us to welcome it when it's uncomfortable. And then to move from where we are. I personally think the most effective skill we can build is not taking the world personally. But that takes time. And certain people, that's going to be hard to do. So by honoring where we are and moving from there, maybe starting with something that feels a little scary but possible, and taking these really small steps and acknowledging them, or acknowledging when we've tried, even if it fell apart. That acknowledgement is going to bring greater clarity and a greater sense of inner steadiness until ultimately, you know, that sensitivity that used to cause us to be reactive and emotional and becomes this really sweet gift that allows us to be with all types of people in all types of situations, even with those people in our family or in our kind of close circle where there's been a long-term dissonance, even there, allowing us to be more steady and get less caught and a little more aware, and to keep engaging in a way that feels healthy and consistent with who we are and what we need. Now, this takes time, it takes years, and admittedly, it can take help. So if you find that you're quite sensitive and that's hard for you to do, I, of course, am happy to work with you. I would love to have a meeting and we can see if we fit. But even beyond me, a good friend, you know, a therapist, finding someone to work through it with will help you to self-regulate through the process. And much of this you can do on your own as well. So if this is interesting to you, please check out the blog. You'll get some journal prompts and some ideas. And if you're like, actually, you know what, I could use some help, please schedule a free session with me. We can talk, see if it's the right fit. There are no strings at all. And if we are the right fit, then we can start to work together and help you ground that sensitivity into strength. Thank you so, so much for your time. I love being here every week. It is an honor. And I will see you again next week.